Welcome to the Room 214 podcast. My name is Vinny Greco. My guest today is the incredible Nathan Hale, author, illustrator, and creator of the Hazardous Tales series. The Hazardous Tales captures important moments in history by hooking young readers with comedy, wit, and outstanding illustrations. While committed to responsible historical research, Nathan's injected dose of imagination takes already fascinating stories of history and transforms them into even more captivating tales that are irresistible not just to children, but all that love history. The series has been nominated for multiple Eisner Awards, and each Hazardous Tale has spent several weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. It is my great pleasure to have Mr. Nathan Hale on the pod. Nathan, welcome to the show.
I'm happy to be here.
This is really cool for me as a history teacher to sit down. So I'm sure you get this a lot. I want to start with the name Nathan Hale itself. And for those unfamiliar with that name, perhaps, the Nathan Hale was a spy for the Continental Army,
right.
Yes, and was executed by the British for said espionage. Were you intentionally named for him? Did your parents love history, or did they have no idea? And speak to that a little bit.
It's just a family name. My grandpa was Nathan Hale, and so I got the name Nathan Hale. And they were not huge history buffs, but it sort of forced me to be a history buff because every year when I started a new class, the teacher would be like, and here we have an American patriot. It's Nathan Hale. So it just kind of pushed me into it.
Gotcha. So when did you discover that you had this shared name with this important figure?
I'm going to say second or third grade, I think, is when it really started to stick. But people probably said things to me before. I was just too young to understand.
Understood. When did teacher, was it even your elementary school teachers? Or
it was especially my elementary school teachers. Yeah.
Wow.
They jumped right in.
Yeah. So sticking with the name, as one reads through the tales, he's kind of like our hero or narrator, along with the hangman and the soldier. What led you to use them to kind of help tell your stories? And what do you love about these characters?
Well, it's funny because I pitched the whole series as a series of graphic novels on American history, but without narrators. And my editor was like, you need to have some kind of through line. And I'm like, well, like what? Because I don't want to do time traveling kids or, something dumb like that. And she said, you really need to have some sort of narration device that ties it all together as a series. So we had actually worked up a whole thing where I thought, what's something that's seen all of history in America? Ooh, I know. How about the eagle that sits on top of the flagpole? You know how the flag has the eagle on the top?
Sure.
We're going to have it. It's going to fly from page to page, and it'll be like our cute little narrator, but it won't be very invasive. It won't, keep popping up and stuff. And we had fully designed it and everything. And then kind of at the last minute, we were talking about it. She didn't love it. We were talking about the name of the series, and I was like, well, what if it just, Nathan Hale was like an American patriot? Some people know that name. I mean, he's not George Washington level or anything like that, but some people kind of know that means history. And then that kind of snowballed into, what if it's the spy Nathan Hale telling the stories? And I wish I could claim full credit, but a lot of it goes to my editor for pushing me. If it wasn't for her, I'd just have this dumb eagle flying around.
So you didn't necessarily pick the idea of using the Nathan Hale story.
I did pick it, but I was kind of pushed right into it. It didn't start as, hey, let's talk about the spy Nathan Hale. It just kind of arrived there. And it's fun. I know it seems ridiculous now that idea didn't immediately come to mind.
But that's collaboration right there.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah, it helps it out. Yeah. So as one reads through these Hazardous Tales, automatic realization that there's so much passion for history and the attention to detail in terms of the illustration. But what for you happened first, this pursuit and love of history or the pursuit and love of creating art?
From day one, I've always been a cartoonist. I was drawing cartoon stories before I could write. I'd just make up the story using just the pictures.
Wow.
I didn't have a TV as a kid. My parents had no TV in the house. We lived in a tiny little apartment. I had a lot of siblings and no TV, so I would just spend all day drawing pictures of the shows that I wished I was watching. And I got good at it, and I got attention at school for being good at drawing. So if people needed a drawing, they knew they could ask me. So I started, people would be like, hey, draw a T-shirt for the class. We'll pay you $5. And $5. So I just took every single art job, even if it was something that didn't appeal to me. A little old lady in my neighborhood wanted a little mural painted for her granddaughter's tea party. So I said yes to all the jobs, and somehow found myself applying to art school, and chasing after every art job, and the history came later. I didn't really get into history. It's historical fiction that got me excited about history. I was a big audiobook listener, so I had a job in high school painting scenery for theaters, and I would just put on an audiobook, paint the set. And I was a big science fiction and fantasy fan, and I burned through all the sci-fi and fantasy at my library. And I thought, well, I got to still listen to something. I was hooked. And I reached out on the shelf. I said, I'm just going to put my hand out. I'm going to listen to whatever's out there. And my hand landed on Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, which is historical Texas adventure. And I'd never read historical fiction or anything that wasn't sci-fi or fantasy before. And that book blew me away.
Wow.
And I was hooked on historical fiction, which led, of course, to nonfiction, which led to, being excited about history, and then led to drawing history. So just kind of, I think the way I ended up here was by just saying yes to every weird opportunity that popped up. Yes to historical fiction, yes to doing jobs, and then you combine it all and you get what this is.
Hearing that, and that's something I would love to share with the kids too. Like, say yes to different opportunities, even if it's not exactly what you thought it'd be.
Oh, you never know where it leads.
Yeah. So would you consider yourself to enjoy history enough where it can compete with your love of science fiction, or?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I haven't read a sci-fi or fantasy book for a very long time now. I still love it. But no, it's all about the history and the nonfiction, and I just love it now.
Awesome. So obviously, my colleagues and I, we love to discuss, say, our favorite topics to teach or what we enjoyed studying in school. What time periods or people or events do you enjoy most reading about? Maybe not even writing about, but just as reading about.
Nothing's better than going in completely blank on something and not knowing, and then because you kind of feel like you're discovering it as you go along, even though, you're reading books that have been written by many, many historians who know all about this stuff. But I love going in blind and just being like, wait, what? With my Louisiana Purchase book right now, I was trying to figure out where to start the book. Does this book start with Napoleon? And I wrote a big thing on Napoleon, read 1 million Napoleon books, watched Napoleon documentaries. And after a while, I realized he doesn't need to be introduced first. This isn't a book about Napoleon. Right. Oh, let's start with Jefferson. I did 1 million Jefferson books and, all of this stuff. Oh, no, he's not quite right either. Where is this book going to start? So as I'm reading this stuff, I'm also trying to find the parts that I get to use, know. And when I started reading and really digging in on the Haitian Revolution, which was one of the key things that led to the Louisiana Purchase, now all of a sudden we're reading about voodoo, people getting their heads cut off with machetes and stuff I had never heard about in history class or anywhere really, and just going, does anybody know about this? And I get excited, and then you read more and you find out more of these stories, and it just gets, so I love kind of going off the beaten track and finding just crazy stories. Because to me, it's always about the personal stories, the personal drama, the personal violence, the crazy things that happen to the people.
Right.
That's that's what you want to read about.
Sometimes history reads like fiction in that way. There's so much just intensity and the mosquitoes, the voodoo mosquitoes, the blood.
Yeah.
So in that way, when you go to pick the topics that you have to cover, are you looking for a natural, there's a story here, or does it, so what, in the ones that you've done, what draws you to them? Was there a through line of things that draw you to, would you say?
Yeah, it's different for each one, which is weird to say, but it really is. I feel like I'm starting from ground zero on every single book, and then figuring out what it's going to be about. I really love finding a person that's really exciting. Lafayette couldn't be more exciting. Harriet Tubman has got to be one of the most interesting people of all time. So when you find a person and you can just do a biography, that's always really exciting. But sometimes there's just big concepts. I had always known that my understanding of World War I was shaky at best, and that everybody else's was too.
Yeah.
So for that book, there's no main character. The main character in my World War I story is World War I.
Right.
And how it went off the rails and, that kind of thing. So the thing on that one was just to see if I could. Can I explain in 128 pages, can I reasonably explain World War I in a way that makes sense to me and to readers, and has funny jokes.
Yeah. So, which leads me to ask, like, there's just so much like eye candy for the reader when you read the Hazardous Tales, right? Just the well-timed jokes, the illustrations themselves, and like the sound effects that jump off the page. What's that process of like start to finish? Like you think of an idea and then to get to the finished product, do you illustrate first? Do you write the story first? Like talk a little bit about that entire process of idea to the awesomeness that is the book.
Well, here's the crazy thing. I'm definitely not the best writer out there. If you want to read some great nonfiction, you got to, Steve Sheinkin is writing amazing nonfiction right now. Just a million great nonfiction authors. So I'm not the greatest nonfiction author, and I'm not the best artist out there either. But I do feel like the magic for me happens when I start combining the two. So I don't draw a single thing until it is fully written, completely fact-checked and edited. I don't draw page one. I wait till all the research, so I honestly try to be two different people. I write the whole thing as just a writer. All the research, everything fully written, the end, everything at the end. And then, once it's all done, then I start drawing it. And I think, the cool thing is, my editor, I shouldn't say this on a recording, but they don't have as much power over what happens with the drawings.
Gotcha.
The editor can go in and really decide, this chapter's not working, or this let's not use these words here. So they're really kind of getting in there and micromanaging, and it's great. That's what makes the book strong. But with the drawings, there's nobody doing, like, there's an art director that makes sure that the cover looks good and this and that, but they're not going over every drawing with a fine-tooth comb. So there's things that happen in the drawings that weren't really there to begin with when I wrote it. For example, in the Donner Party book, I wrote the whole thing, all the research, all of everything. But I knew people were going to start dying a lot, but I thought, well, I'm going to solve that in the drawings.
Right.
I don't know if I'm going to just show like dead people. There's all these weird questions because the books are for all ages. You can't really show that much in the way of gore and death.
Right.
But it's a cartoon. It's a comic book. So as I was drawing the Donner Party, there was a little joke the hangman says about how death is always near. And the hangman is like, what, you mean like the Grim Reaper is always near? And we started drawing the Grim Reaper into the pages. So now there can be a whole page where there's all kinds of dialogue and everything. It doesn't say anything about there being a giant Grim Reaper hiding off in the corner. But when the reader sees that Grim Reaper, that's like the symbol goes right into their brain. And they know exactly what's going on. And then the Grim Reaper will show up at the end of a scene, and like the names of the people who died will be on the cloak. That wasn't written into the manuscript. That all happened with the artwork. So really the magic happens when I feel like I'm a little bit of a translator, like I'm translating the written word into a cartoon. Not just drawing it, but making it into... It's weird. That's the weirdest spot, is when I'm cutting and pasting the words into the document and seeing how they need to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in that way you have a little more autonomy.
Oh, yeah.
I hear what you're saying, like kind of... It's almost like sneaking past the editor in a way.
A little tiny bit.
Yeah.
I mean, she's happy with everything. And if it's a major issue, I will always, ask and make sure they like it before really jumping in on it.
Yeah.
In this upcoming book, I have a character who's a kid, and we do flashbacks from their adulthood to their childhood. And the hangman doesn't like it. He's confused. He's like, I can't tell when this is a kid and when it's an adult. Why do we keep saying a kid and then he's old? You should start when they're young and end when they're old. I can't. And he has a crazy mustache when he's old, so the hangman's like, can we at least just put the mustache on the kid too? So the kid always has a mustache. And like, it's a visual joke that's literally on every single page now, and I never asked. I just turned that in.
Yeah.
I think they like it.
Yeah. The hangman's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
The hangman's great. I'd meant to ask you this before. Out of all the people you've studied and the events and things like that, is there like a character or two, and it probably isn't necessarily even Nathan Hale, character that sticks out for you as the coolest, or someone you most admire? And I guess those can be two different questions, but a historical figure that like sticks out to you, like that person's awesome.
Yeah. It's so interesting because so many people that do amazing things were also awful at the same time. I mean, Thomas Jefferson is a famous example of being an amazing he writes the Declaration of Independence while he has slaves. It just makes your brain hurt to even think about.
I went off on a tangent the other day
Yeah,
about Mr. Jefferson.
How?
It was hilarious.
How does it work?
Oh man, I'm reading the Hamilton book.
The Ron Chernow book.
Yeah, and I was like, hey, does everyone have a few minutes for me to go off on Thomas Jefferson? So I hear you loud and clear.
Yep. As far as the people I've written about, hands down, Harriet Tubman is the most heroic and fascinating person. I think because everybody sees the photo of her in her very old age, everybody assumes she was kind of like this saintly old lady.
Yeah.
Because that's when the photo was taken. And that's certainly not the case. She was wild and crazy, and the rescue adventures and stuff she pulled and never, ever got busted or caught is just, especially considering that she had a very powerful health issue that would cause her to kind of fall asleep every so often. She just completely blows me away with everything she did is amazing. I really like Lafayette. I think he was really trying to do his best. He's kind of the opposite. Harriet Tubman worked great with everything possible stacked against her.
Right. Two different upbringings.
And became just a great person. Lafayette's completely the opposite end because everything was stacked for him. He should have been awful. He was so rich. He was so, well-loved and famous and everything to still actually become a good person.
Yeah.
That's good for him, He's super interesting. I'll tell you who's crazy interesting right now is Napoleon. I can't wrap my mind around it. I always want there to be like a magic bullet. Oh, this is why Napoleon was so great, because he did this. There's no breakthroughs. It's just force of will. He just decided he was going to win, and he just started winning, and he wouldn't stop winning. And is it a secret weapon? Nope. Just force of will. They couldn't stop him, which is fascinating to me. He's really interesting. And he's always I grew up with Napoleon as kind of like a silly old villain or something, and he's not. He's a lot more complicated than that.
Sure. Yeah, those are good ones, and those are all super interesting. And
oh yeah,
and to hear the way you told the Napoleon story today was just outstanding. So in 7th and 8th grade, we take our students to like countless museums.
Oh.
We take a trip. We go to Boston. We go to D.C. Talk a little bit about your work with museums. And is your approach the same or different? What does it entail when you're working with museums?
So one of the reasons I'm such a stickler for making everything look right is before I became a full-time freelance author and illustrator, my job was working in museums. Now, I never worked in history museums. It was natural history museums. So this was dinosaurs and the Ice Age and, things like that. And the boss that I worked for was a company called Chase Studios. They had done museums all over the world. I was a mural painter for them, and I would do the background of big scientific dioramas and say like I'd be doing an underwater scene from like the Devonian era or, some weird, dinosaur era of undersea life. And they had scientists on staff that would go in and make sure every single thing painted up there was exactly right. There was literally a guy who would go count the rays in a fish's fin, right? If you don't know what the rays are, I learned this term that day. The rays are the little lines in a fish's fin. So he's up there with a ruler going, this species is supposed to have 28 rays on its dorsal fin. You got like 7 rays. So they would let me have it if I didn't make everything as accurate as possible. Now, these books aren't photo accurate. Everything's a silly cartoon. Right. But it makes me crazy to think that there might be people out there that go, oh, wait a minute, that is not how a sergeant's uniform looks in 1915, Right. So I try to make it as close to realistic as possible and how things look. And I don't do that anymore. This cartooning thing has become so full-time that I don't get to paint natural history museums anymore. It's kind of a bummer.
So would you consider continuing if you were given the opportunity, or just a time thing for you?
Everything really changed right about the time I moved into freelance because technology caught up with the mural painter. And you can now print huge canvas. So instead of having 2 guys spend 8 months painting a giant thing, you have one person do a small illustration and then print it on a big canvas and you're done. Mm-hmm. So that's not a job people can even get very easily anymore. So, yeah.
So I myself am not the biggest fanboy of sci-fi or horror because I scare really easy. But I do indeed love tacos and often find myself in a Taco Bell drive-through every now and again. Tell us a little bit about Apokolips Taco and the other sci-fi work you've done and what inspires you to write in these other genres.
It's funny because you'd think, in 2019, if somebody's doing 2 comic series and one is about American history with powdered wigs and Boston Tea Parties, and the other one is like Stranger Things with monsters and ghosts and robots and aliens, you'd think, oh, clearly the sci-fi one will be popular. Nope. Right now, the nonfiction is far more popular than my sci-fi stuff. And I just need a break every once in a while from all the research. The research can kind of bog you down, especially if it's something really awful like all the death in World War I or slavery or these things. After this Haitian Revolution book, I really feel like I'm going to need a break. That's brutal stuff in there. And I just want to take a break and write something scary and gross and fun. And it really is. It's just for fun, but I also have a real love for that whole genre. I read a lot of it growing up, still read a lot of it. And when I see comics for kids that have to do with like the supernatural or stuff, it's always just like, oh, spooky, Scooby-Doo, it's kind of jokey. I think kids can really handle a lot more deeper scares. So when I do these books, I really try to make them as scary as possible. Just because why not? I really liked a good scare as a kid, ghost stories and campfire stories and things like that. But I didn't want them to always end with a joke or anything. And both of my books would definitely qualify first as science fiction and second as horror. It's like, science gone wrong or aliens invasion or, that kind of thing.
I find that our kids, when they talk about going to the movies and stuff and what they're watching on Netflix, it's still, like, horror is still, like, towards the top. I feel like the most. So I think that's a really good place to go with it. Last question before I let you go. For our students who love to create in whatever medium that may be, what would you tell them about getting started or to how to go down the road where they can explore pursuing that art creation as a career?
There's a crazy path right now that didn't exist when I was in high school or middle school. When I was in high school or middle school, I loved sharing my art with everybody and not just doing jobs for people. Sure, I would do T-shirts and scenery and posters and all of that stuff, but when I wanted to draw my own creations, there wasn't much of an avenue. I had to go get a photocopy pass or something and make photocopies to give people stuff. And I really like sharing my artwork, so every year I made a Christmas calendar with a drawing for every month of the year and gave it to all my friends and families. I take my 12 best drawings, photocopy it. That was a lot of work, but it gave me a deadline to work towards. But today, the internet is amazing. If you want to start drawing, you can put that stuff out there. One of my illustrator friends, another cartoonist, Jake Parker, who does wonderful drawings. He did a book called Missile Mouse for Scholastic. He's got a son who started a comic online. I don't know the links and stuff. His name's Robo Tater Tot. He started drawing his own little comics online, and some of his comics have become memes that every kid in America sees. He did a comic about the Scroll of Truth. If you've seen that one, the little character climbs to the top of the mountain to get the Scroll of Truth, and then he opens it, and it's something stupid. Well, people use that meme to tell all these different things, and then, of course, he throws the Scroll of Truth off the mountain.
Right.
But that is international, and he drew it when he was 14. If you want to you get a free blog space, you can draw digitally, or you can just take a phone picture of your drawing. You put it up every day.
Yeah.
My taco story was born on a webcomic that I drew. For about 4 years, I did daily webcomics, weekdays, every day. In fact, my Hazardous Tales series was born there as well. I did a short Lewis and Clark story that was in my pitch to the publisher for doing history comics. And it kept me drawing every night. I had to make sure to post. I didn't have the world's biggest following, and I frankly got so busy that I had to shutter the website. But my biggest wish is that I had started earlier so that I could have done comics, have started much earlier, so that I could, right now it's a great time, and I know lots of people who are getting book deals now are coming from webcomics.
Wow. So it's really just a matter of putting yourself out there and be willing to try.
It's 100% that, because publishers want to see that you can do it. And if you're putting that up online every day, and in your cover letter you say, "Hi, this is my idea for a book. Refer to my webcomic. It's got 10,000 followers, and it's been updated every day." They see, oh, here's a person who works, here's a person who finishes, and I can read it. I can go in there and read it if it's funny.
Yeah.
The publishers, I know, I want to say 6 authors, not cartoonists, but authors, who have sold graphic novel manuscripts. But the publisher can't find artists for them, right? That is how hungry publishing is for graphic novels right now, but that's also how hard it is to draw one. Publishers want to find artists, but there just aren't enough to go around to fit the styles that these authors want. So if you can already draw, jump the queue. Start drawing and writing your own.
Great advice. That's all the time we have for today's pod. I want to thank Nathan for sitting down with me today and sharing his work and perspective on history and art with the NBP middle school community. The energy and passion you have for history and art really shines through, and we are all inspired by it. You can find all of Nathan's work, including the Hazardous Tales, as well as his latest sci-fi work, Apokolips Taco, at nathanhaleauthor.com. Next week, I'll sit down with the NBP STEAM coordinators, Ariel Jesperson and Taylor Niss. We'll discuss the importance of marrying all STEAM disciplines while helping students master 21st century skills. You can catch the Room 214 podcast on SoundCloud or Apple Podcasts. Thanks so much for listening. This is Vinny Greco wishing you peace and much love.